I'm carrying straight on. The question this time for this essay is, how do writers present desire in two poems of your choice? You know you're not going to get the choice in the exam of two, but that's how we're going to put this together today. So I'm going to pair up two poems here, and I'm going to do a combination which some people say is slightly unusual, but I'm going to explain why I think it's a good one. So I'm talking about Charlotte Mews' The Farmer's Bride. And this is the point where people like to compare The Farmer's Bride a lot of the time with Porphyria's Lover. I'm not going to compare it with Porphyria's Lover. I'm going to compare it to Love's Philosophy by Percy Shelley. Why are we going to do that? Because those other two, Porphyria's Lover and Farmer's Bride, they seem to have so much in common. Well, that makes a good essay. That's a good pairing. And if you want to do that, go for it. I have a slight concern with those two. They're both long poems. They're complicated. They're very complex. And they are telling not the same story, but a similar story about an overbearing male, domineering, scary, powerful male figure who's got this dominance and this power over his object of his affection, right? His love object, the female love object who is disempowered and meets a bad end, in both of these poems. So that's a really, really good level for comparison. But I like to compare this with Love's Philosophy because Love's Philosophy, in a way, is also about a male figure who is being powerful and overbearing and is trying to impose his will, which has arisen as a result of his desire for this love object of his. He's trying to impose that onto her, basically against her will. So in a way, there's a really, really obvious connection between these two poems, but there's enough about the two poems that's different because Percy Shelley does not think he's sitting down to write a kind of Farmer's Bride type poem here. He doesn't realise he's doing that. There is enough to say about the two that is different as well as being similar, the way they look on the page, the kind of thought processes which have gone into producing them, that this then makes for a really nice essay. I think The Farmer's Bride is quite a complex little poem. Love's Philosophy, I'm not going to use the word easy because that's not the right word in this case, but I am going to say that I think that of all the poems in the anthology, actually, it's a pretty straightforward poem to get your head around what Shelley's saying. So I'm going to try and do this, in a structured way, where I'll work through 3 lines of argument and talk about a couple of ideas and different ways that I might compare these two. But you may choose to compare these poems differently. You may choose to take different lines of arguments or to choose different or new or additional pieces of evidence to support your arguments. That is very good. Please do that. Please don't just, adhere to what I'm going to say in this YouTube video. You know that you're going to do your own thing. Okay, but what I want to show you is I want to break this down into 3 parts, my 3 lines of argument, and I want the overlap to work like this. Number 1, section 1, I want to talk about the presentation of desire itself, and we're reading that as, the strong, passionate feeling of desiring another person in a romantic sense. I think it's absolutely fine you don't need to do a lot of other unpacking of that desire. There's an element of that which is sexual desire, there's an element of that which might be obsessive desire, but it's all kind of overlapping on the same Venn diagram of, person A has this very strong feeling towards person B. So I want to talk in my first section about how desire itself is presented as a powerful force. Now, we have already spoken in lessons, and you will know the poem about how Percy Bysshe Shelley has a lot of tricks up his sleeve to describe his feelings of desire as being a powerful force. And one of the main sort of hit you over the head with an inflatable mallet techniques that he uses for this is his strong, bold, vivid use of romantic sublime imagery, the mountains, the seas, the oceans, the rivers, and this also gives you a nice little sideway into just mentioning, hey, this is all stuff which is contextually, contextually appropriate for the kind of poet he was because he was a romantic poet. You know that, okay? So he's setting up this grand vision of his strong feelings for this unnamed, slightly anonymous object of his affection, right? Which we'll kind of come to in when we look at, the kind of darker tinge to this poem. Remember that Percy Shelley almost certainly doesn't see this poem as being as sort of unpleasant or doesn't have that kind of nasty edge that we in some ways read that poem as doing now, because we don't quite really like the way this poem feels in 2020. So you can get right into that, all of that natural stuff. And over with the poem The Farmer's Bride, you can compare that directly to the way that Charlotte Mew is also using very, very, very vivid imagery that brings this poem to life. Not just the natural imagery, and if you wanted to compare this to, that there's natural imagery which is the romantic sublime, that's your mountains and your rivers, and then if you talked about, for example, a phrase like pastoral imagery, which refers specifically to farms and fields and that kind of thing, then we've got the leveret, the wild violets, the young larch tree, and we know that she's compared to an animal, but also these frightened sort of prey animals as well, not just animals. Animal could be tiger or a bear or something huge and imposing and strong. No, these are animals which are scared. They run away as soon as you get anywhere near them. They don't want to be seen by people. So Charlotte Mew, the poet, is using vivid imagery to describe this relationship, and therefore the intensity of this feeling of desire. I think in this whole poem, because you do not need to start at the top and work your way through, I think the most intense expression of desire through vivid language use in this poem is the last bit of the poem. She sleeps up in the attic there alone, poor maid, 'tis but a stair betwixt us. Oh my God, the explosions of expression there, the exclamation marks, of course, the outbursts of this, not being able to process and contain this rather simple-minded farmer, right? This feeling that he's got for this woman. The soft young down of her, the brown of her eyes, her hair. We see in that simplistic repetition, it's simplistic on the one hand, but on the other hand, it's very powerful because it's telling us everything we need to know about this person's inability to articulate his feelings, right? He is a simple-minded person who's literally objectifying this woman, and the language there, which is simple, but it's got this kind of terrifying edge to it. So there's more to say here, right? We're backing all of that up with the kind of sound devices, which are literally the building blocks of the images and the words that are being used, and you can explore all of that, of course. I'm moving through this more swiftly today. The second point that I'm going to say is desire is presented as a patriarchal force. So this is more of a complex point. That's why I'm bringing it into my second section, right? A patriarchal force. And by that, what I'm saying is that in these two poems, doesn't matter whether you would believe this or you don't, but in these two poems, desire is being presented as a force which basically is a dynamic between a desiring male person and a female person who is the object to be desired. That means that the status is tipped in favour of the man, the male perspective, the male patriarchal force, and also because it's an idea of not just a man but a whole patriarchy, that sits within a wider structure of patriarchal forces. And here's how. In Shelley's poem, we know that this is a patriarchal force. We know this is about status and power because Shelley is using rhetorical structures and rhetorical techniques to try to get what he wants to achieve from this young woman, which is basically objectifying her. Okay, that's what he wants to achieve. He does that through rhetorical devices. We've talked about this already, but you'll remember the way the poem is structured. There are 7 lines of, if, and then 1 line of why not, and then even the way that the meter isn't fully played out on the last line, you get that pause, that empty sort of pregnant pause. It's a very powerful way of setting up your ideas. We also have that strong imagery, the references to God and religion, and basically what Shelley is doing, the reason why this is not just a powerful individual man but powerful patriarchal society, is that Percy Shelley is aligning his male desire with the power of the whole world, right? The natural world, but this is implying all of, the whole planet Earth is on his side, and then it's very accusatory. Why aren't you? Why aren't you? And why can you not see what is so obvious to see? And it is the jabbing finger, but it's that, right? Charlotte Mew does the same thing here. She has got, very cleverly, she's, transposed her ideas into the perspective of this male character to tell a narrative poem. So it's a different form to the rhetorical poem that Shelley is writing. Now it's a narrative. He's not asking anybody to do anything. He's already got her, says that in the first few lines, we know, I chose a maid. I chose a maid. Even the very simple language there, but it's very powerful because it's about the status and the patriarchal position of this man. Too young, maybe, doesn't really care, but more to do at harvest time than bride and woo. But importantly, she runs away, and then from line 10 onwards, down the next couple of stanzas, 15, we chased her, what you get is that this farmer has aligned himself with society, right? Because it's not just the farmer running after her, it's a whole, field of people running across the dark fields. So this poor, frightened young woman, young girl, this young person, she is made to feel like she must be in the wrong because all of these forces are literally dragging her back towards this person. So it's a very, very sort of terrifying, almost like a horror story. This feeling about this is very gothic in the sense of this. Now, this leads into AO 3 points pretty neatly because, as you can imagine, you've discussed, absolutely plenty. Just think about An Inspector Calls if you want to talk about attitudes towards women and women's limited power in society in the 1910s, in 1912, right? Because it's exactly the time period that we're talking about here, and we know that stuff applies to further back in history as well. If you want to bring in references to, years of suffrage, women getting the vote, make these precise with your individual points, and that's really, really good as well, as long as you do what I've said earlier and actually say, this is not just a date that I've learned, but this is why Charlotte Mew's poem works in the way it does at the time it was written. This character is powerless.